West Lafayette may bring a chill to Buckeyes fans when they hear that name, if you've been around long enough or if you've only been around for about 5 years. Purdue has not always been welcome territory for the Buckeyes in the history of the two schools, considering Purdue's plight in the Big Ten. Well, we've got another date in Indiana against the Boilers coming up here. Welcome to Buckeyes Live, number 234 here at the Voice of College Football. We would ask that you would like the video, share these videos out on social media, subscribe right here, and lock in with our panel. Of course, we got Kevin Noon right next to me, BuckeyeHuddle.com. It's the Big Mean Podcast, and you'll want to look out for Tale of the Tape. We will hear more about that coming up. Tony Gerdeman in the corner. We're all in the corner. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Huddle. It's the Buckeye Weekly podcast that downloads just about every day for you during football season, and college football playbook with Tony and with Kevin right here on YouTube, and Steve Hellwagon, just merely Bucknuts 247 Sports. But then you can find Steve on all sorts of media outlets all over the state of Ohio and beyond, just about every day. Guys, how we doing?
Doing well.
Doing well.
All right, Tony, let's tee up this Maryland game before we move on to Purdue. And the big sore spot would be interior blocking, offensive line. Chip Tranum, 3 yards per carry. It wasn't until maybe the last 2 drives of the game Mayan Williams started to be a battering ram down the field a few times. But other than that, I thought it was a really good performance. But we'll start with what appears to be the weakness.
Yeah, and that was a popular topic of conversation with Ryan Day on Tuesday. And you think back to the Notre Dame game. I think it starts back there with Travion Henderson having a 60-yard touchdown run and the team rushing for, whatever they did, 130 yards or whatever. And half of that came on the one carry. And Ryan Day said, the yards all count. People say you take away one run and it all counts. But then when Travion Henderson isn't playing, you literally take away that one run and you end up with the 60 yards that they ended up with against Maryland. And so if you're not going to get that one big carry that clouds some of the statistics, then things are going to look bad. And they miss him. And, I still don't think Mayan Williams is the Mayan Williams that we've seen from the past. And Chip Trainum is what he is. And the fact that he has overtaken Mayan being what he is interesting to me, but not having Travion Henderson cloud some things, but also it's not like Travion Henderson has been outstanding either. He's averaging 7 yards a carry or so, like 6.8, but it's because of those big runs. He still gets tackled like the other guys do right at the line of scrimmage. And that's because you look at this offensive line and there's very little push. And they can bring in more tight ends into the box. That just brings in more defenders into the box, which creates even less push. So, Ryan Day was asked about it, didn't have any really great answers other than, sometimes it's hands, sometimes it's feet, sometimes, it's just not physical enough, although I don't actually think he said that. And the common refrain was everybody can get better. And that's what you say when you don't want to say these guys aren't good enough.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to come out of Ryan Day's mouth. Anything. I think he's taken that there's about 4 versions of physical that he's completely let's not even go there. Kevin, your thoughts about the win over the Terps?
Yeah, and it kind of dovetails into some of the things that Ryan Day talked about during the presser, as well as the play of the offensive line. And obviously even Joel Platt was talking about how the offensive line wasn't climbing up into the second level. And, your running backs are getting hit at the line of scrimmage, a yard back. It's just not necessarily working out. And he was asked about shaking things up maybe on the offensive line. I mean, how are the backups looking? And it's not a case that the backups are pushing, trying to get 20 or 30 snaps a game, which is kind of, again, coach speak for they're not quite there yet. But offensive line certainly is a major concern in terms of the run game. And then when you look at this upcoming Purdue game, one thing that Purdue does well is get after the quarterback. Now, it hasn't necessarily faced many teams that are known for quarterback play or anything like that. I mean, we are talking about a Purdue team that is 1-5 on the year, but Ohio State's offensive line is going to have to perform better because it is just not getting it done in terms of what it needs to do. And here on Wednesday, we're supposed to be able to talk to assistants more so than players, and the hope will be that maybe we get to talk to Justin Fry again and kind of see what the mindset is there with how the offensive line is playing, because it's here through the first 6 games, with Purdue being the 6th game, maybe you're able to get away with some stuff, but boom, right there at game 7, you're hosting Penn State, a team that certainly has a strong front 7, and I think it's going to get really real in a hurry.
Yeah, a little bit of a disadvantage. I've been in Minneapolis the last 2 days for the Big Ten basketball media days, so I did not attend Coach Day's press conference yesterday, but did follow along on a lot that was discussed, and it sounds like it's a personnel issue, just not executing the blocking schemes and not executing the blocks. I saw the Joel Klatt video as well, and he laid it out there as best as you can that the offensive linemen just aren't getting to the linebackers, who are then able to run free and make plays and hit the running backs to the line of scrimmage, and you're just not going to get a lot of yards when they're getting hit in the backfield and they're getting hit right at the line of scrimmage. So I'm not sure what you're going to do 5 games into a season to change that. Kind of you are what you are at this point. I saw one comment that they were really only out schemed by Maryland one time. So kind of lays it at the feet of the players for not executing what was laid out there. But it's not good enough, very simply. It's not. I mean, that game last week, I got on a downhill roll on our, as you guys know, I want to do on our post-game show. Just so many things were wrong about that game. And what's particularly galling is it came after an open week. And, for 2 weeks, they had everybody, as we feared, telling them you are the greatest thing in the world after beating Notre Dame by basically a technicality. They beat Notre Dame by that much. It isn't like you went out there and you dominated Notre Dame in their stadium. You won the game by 6 inches, So let's don't, crown them. And now Notre Dame, of course, has gone on the road and lost to Louisville. It seems like a good enough team, I suppose. But there were so many things wrong with the game last week that the running game is obviously the number one thing that is just completely out of whack for Ohio State right now. But it's not good enough. If it was a good team, they would have been down 17-0 instead of 10-0, maybe 21-0. And I mean, Maryland turned it over on 4th down in Ohio State territory. I mean, that would have been another something had they converted that. Great play by the defense. The defense is holding them in these games till the offense finally chips away, and they're winning the game on 60 minutes of attrition more than they're beating the opponent. That's kind of what I got watching the game, that Maryland in the 4th quarter realized, well, we got it to the 4th quarter. We're down 3. We achieved our mission. We got it to the 4th quarter. Then they just kind of rolled over and played dead in the 4th quarter. And Ohio State, punched it in a couple times. And, I mean, God, he played right into their hands, turning it over on downs at the 30-yard line. And then there was a personal foul, and they moved it to the 15-yard line and, scored after that. I mean, the game was over. So, we can get into some of it here in this hour. But to me, they were poorly prepared, poorly coached, had no energy, had no drive, and that's what it showed.
Before we move on from the offensive line, the pass protection's, I think, reasonably good, right?
Well, even the Josh Fryer sack, Kyle McCord has an entire pocket to step up into, and he's just hanging back, 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, waiting to get sacked. When there was a definite pocket for him to step into. So I think that's also an issue. If Kyle McCord sees things quicker, sooner, earlier, feels that pressure and just steps up in to where, you're allowed to move up in there and step in there and see things. But I don't know if right now he just needs a wider view. And yet when they start moving tempo, he starts doing better. When, it shouldn't taking an entire quarter for this to really get him going, I think is an issue. But I also think that time shrinks down the more he plays, and you won't need an entire quarter to get going. But the sack that Josh Fryer gave up, I can't fault Josh Fryer necessarily for that one, because a quarterback is allowed to step up into the pocket and throw it or take off or whatever. And I'm sure people would have been screaming at CJ Stroud for that one last year.
Yeah, Ohio State, very much a slow starting team. I think it's 21 first quarter points. The second quarter, everybody says it's the first bad first half team, but I think the second quarter is somewhere in the high 60s, like 68, I think, and then 41 and 41 in the third and fourth, respectively. But Ohio State has to get out there to a quicker start. I think that Ohio State, it might behoove Ohio State to run a little bit more tempo as soon as it is available. You can't necessarily do it off of a 1 yard running loss or anything like that. But I think that giving Kyle maybe a little less time to sit there and try and think for the perfect situation every single time and just have him go out there and ball may be the best thing for him at this point. And it certainly seems like that's when he relaxes a little and is freed up somewhat.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I had the same thoughts about Kyle McCord looking good in the second half. And once he gets into the rhythm of the game, and obviously the final drive plus against Notre Dame, but early on, another Joel Klatt analysis. And then once he breaks it down, and you can see not necessarily the 22 film, but you can see behind the quarterback down the field, you see where he checks down. And again, it didn't seem to be an issue later in the game after probably getting a talking to, but the first couple drives where clean pocket, he's standing there, and he's not waiting for linebackers to clear and windows to open, and he's just boom, check down. And but then again, he didn't do that the entire game. Things opened up. Marvin Harrison did his thing, and the passing game got going. But to Steve's point, it could be 17 zip, 21 zip against a good team down the road if they don't figure out how to get things jump started from the get-go.
Well, and I think that's also the frustrating thing, is because you know what he can do. And so when he's not doing it and you're planning on him doing that, that changes how you call plays, what you're calling, the effectiveness, setting up the next play. And yet even when, he completed 2 long passes, one to Marvin Harrison for 58 yards and one to Julian Fleming for like 37 or something like that. And both of those should have been, the Marvin Harrison should have been a 90-yard touchdown. The other should have been a touchdown as well. Like, you're 2 for 2 for 95 yards on those, but you should have been 2 for 2 for 140 yards on those. And, that's something that people remember as well. And that's why people are a little upset with McCord. But, he finished like 17 of 22, his last 22 passes for, however, 200 and whatever yards. And so that is all there. And we remember the Notre Dame thing, and you're not just you can't live on that forever. Troy Smith or JT Barrett got to live off of the Penn State comeback win for 1 week before he went to Iowa, and his first pass got picked sixth. So it doesn't last for long, and you've got to stack games on top of games. But I saw the comment in here about he's Craig Krenzel. 2 of 7 is Craig Krenzel. 17 of 22 was never, ever Craig Krenzel. And so he is far beyond Craig Krenzel as a passer. But it's like people think it's Craig Krenzel and it's CJ Stroud. And there's a long, there's a big gap between those two, and a long line of quarterbacks that you could put in there. You don't have to be down here or up there. It's okay to be somewhere in the middle. And that's where Kyle McCord is right now. You're muted, Mark.
I don't even know if it's worth mentioning, but I will anyway, because we're talking about running game struggling. Was that Maryland game, speaking of last year's Maryland game with Dallan Haydan, was that like a mirage or something that never happened? Like, why is he gone? A mystery.
I can jump in. Because The plan is to redshirt him. They don't want to play him more than 4 games. We've seen injuries hit the Ohio State running back room in the past, and if you have those 4 games available in mid to late November and even into the bowl season, you put yourself in a better position. It's not necessarily worth rolling him out there and letting him have 5 carries in a game and get him up to 5 games, and then he loses a year of eligibility. So, according to Ryan Day, Dallan Haydan is ready to go. It's not a lack of practice ethic or anything like that that's keeping him off the field. But when you have the 3 backs, the 3 veteran backs, there are a lot of veterans right now that are, holding down positions, and they just don't want to burn younger guys that have a red shirt available to them their year at this point. So, if you get into a point where you need to insert them into a game, you could still run them 30 times in a game. It doesn't matter. I mean, you get 4 games regardless if it's 1 play in the game or 60 plays in a game. So that's kind of where we stand.
Talking Buckeyes with all of you here at the Voice of College Football every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time is typically the time, but please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Tony, I think you had something.
No, I'm good. I will say in terms of the running game, this Ryan Day, since he has been at Ohio State 2019 as the head coach, Ohio State has been the only team in the Big Ten in that time to finish in the top 4 of rushing every year. No, Michigan hasn't done it. Wisconsin hasn't done it. Ohio State has done it. But this might be the year. They're going to have to really turn it on to make it top 4 this year, because I just don't see it happening. I don't know how they – and I keep saying, if they rush for 100 yards against Penn State, half of that's going to come on 1 run. And you can say the same thing about Michigan. And so, they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have to throw the ball to win against the best teams. And also the defense is going to have to give up, no more than 17 points, something like that, because right now I think you need the running game to be in some sort of a shootout so that you can have some sort of control over the line of scrimmage. And eventually if you just throw it, and the defense is ready for it and expecting it, bad things happen.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with that. I don't think they can shoot out, go that mode all the way to a undefeated season or 11-1, with the key victory being whatever it needs to be, probably the last one. The way things stack up right now, is the defense as good as I'm starting to think it is? Because I looked at Notre Dame's metrics. In at least yards per play and a few others, but yards per play stood out to me. They're 17th in the country in yards per play. Mm-hmm. Like, I watched that Notre Dame offense pretty much every play the last 3 weeks. Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and they don't look that good. But it comes out to 17th in the nation in yards per play. Those 3 teams are good. NC State's okay. And when I know NC State's, people are going to jump on that comment. But when you look at the aggregate of that schedule that Notre Dame has played against most teams in the country, they've probably played one of the toughest schedules in the country, no doubt. And they're 17th in yards per play, and Ohio State's, I think, 4th in yards per play against, having played Notre Dame 2 weeks ago, having played Maryland, who runs up points and yards on everybody else.
Western Kentucky does the same thing as well with yards and points. I think it's been impressive. I'll let everybody else talk, but there are moments when the run defense looks a little bit suspect, but yet it leads to 17 points from Maryland, and 7 of those are on a 30-yard touchdown drive. So, like, whatever they're doing is working, and there's still more to come. But you don't want to. It's interesting watching Jim Knowles talking about how he's not doing as much blitzing as he wants to or has done in the past, but he's okay with that because it's working and he's coming around on that. But you can't, you've got to grow each week. You've got to build and add to it each week. And so I'm interested to see how that goes and who steps up. We're seeing JT Tuimoloau step up. The linebackers taking a turn for the worse is a surprise to me, but it's also something. Jim Knowles seems to think they're fine. And again, is this a situation of him not wanting to throw anybody under the bus? Because he said they're playing well. And I don't know that I would agree with that right now.
Yeah, each week we sit there and it's like, well, wait until Ohio State gets to its next opponent, and like we almost don't want to give them credit for what they've done so far. They go against Western Kentucky and hold them largely in check, but that's a one-dimensional offense that can only throw the ball. So wait till they play Notre Dame, and they largely shut down Notre Dame's offense. But just wait until they go against Taulia, who may be the best quarterback in the Big Ten. And well, we've seen Notre Dame struggle to score points in the subsequent weeks after playing Ohio State. Now Ohio State does a pretty good job of keeping Taulia shut down. Well, Maryland's not much of a great running team. Wait until they go against Penn State and a dual, an offense that's really swinging with both arms, with rushing and passing. And if Ohio State passes that test, I'm sure that we'll kick the can down the road a little bit further. I mean, I think I'm starting to buy into this Ohio State defense. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. I mean, as Tony said, I mean, there certainly has been a little bit of concern in terms of the run game, but honestly, if you look at just the numbers, only Notre Dame had success running against Ohio State. I mean, Purdue's not going to. I mean, Devin Maccabee's not going to be running all over them. And people can sit there and say, well, you can go back to 2018. You guys were probably saying Wandell Moore wasn't going to do anything. Well, this is a different situation. It's an extremely banged up Purdue team, but I think that they're doing a good job. And one more time to Tony's point, as I'm getting close to when I'm going to have to jump out of here, they're not blitzing as much, but Jim Knowles said the threat of the blitz is always there. And I think that is a good thing, that opposing offenses know that Ohio State does have the ability to blitz really at any given time. And the fact that hangs over the head, and if Ohio State's able to disguise coverage and sim pressure and do some things like that, that all helps the cause.
So, Kevin, before you need to leave, Jayvan Boggs is wide receiver out of Cocoa, Florida.
Yeah, originally from Dayton, I believe, though. So Cocoa, Florida, program that has produced Ohio State commits and decommits along the way. Cedric Hawkins, who's currently on the team, went to Cocoa, as well as Jamel Dean and Bruce Judson Jr. I had to think it through there. And he is somebody who's saying that Ohio State's giving him the message that they see a lot of Jackson Smith and Jigba in him. And that's a pretty high praise. Granted, we play that superlative game all the time. We need to have the comp. Everybody was going to be the next Percy Harvin under Urban Meyer or whatnot. But, Jayvan Boggs, 6 foot, $188. This is a big get. I mean, I think that the recruiting services are just behind on him, only having him as a 3-star. He's not necessarily in one of the high leverage areas of the state of Florida. He's not in South Florida, and he's not in Tampa. So maybe he's been underseen a little bit, but Brian Hartline can go out and pretty much, will certainly get any receiver in the nation to take his call. And if he's ready to take him at this point of the process, that's really good enough for me.
Kevin, whenever you need to jump off, but in the meantime, let people know where they can find you this week.
Yeah. Obviously you can find me at Twitter, Kevin_Noon. You can find me on the Big Me podcast, or the Big Me Kickoff podcast over at Buckeye Huddle, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. I've got Tail of the Tape already in the can. Probably I'm changing my schedule up a little bit. I think I'm going to just start running those on Thursday. So look for it Thursday morning. Behind Enemy Lines is already written up, as well as I talked to Tom Dienhart of goldenblack.com, part of the On Free network. I'll have that as well. And keep an eye out for maybe some more recruiting news coming out. 24 could be close to making a decision, as well as a 25 who's set to announce on Saturday. So be on top of all of that, as well as at Purdue. But once again, you can find me at all those places.
Excellent.
Bye con Dios, gentlemen.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Talking to Boggs, I talked to him a couple of days ago after the commit, and he said what sold it for him, other than growing up a Buckeye fan, so this is something he wanted to do, obviously, but Brian Hartline telling him that you remind me basically of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And if you watch his highlights, he runs like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't know if he's as fast or as cuts quite like him, but he runs like him. but he is cooking the Florida defenses right now in high school. Like put 4 touchdowns on St. Thomas Aquinas, scored 14 touchdowns in the last 5 weeks, like 700 and some yards receiving in the last 5 games. So he's putting up some numbers, and he was offered back in the summer. We all watched him, offered then, and has talked to Cedric Hawkins, who is Ohio State freshman from Cocoa, and they've talked about it since he got his offer, what it's like at Ohio State, what life is like at Ohio State. And Hawkins has told him they're going to keep it real with you the entire time, and they have to this point. But he's a 2025 kid, so it's still a long way to go. He told me he's not planning on any other visits. He's locked in on Ohio State. But being a Florida commit, you Florida kid committed from Florida, you never know. But this is like Kevin said, he moved to Florida when he was about 6 from Ohio. His family are Buckeye fans. He's a Buckeye fan. And to make you feel old, he said his favorite players growing up are Ezekiel Elliott and Michael Thomas.
Oh, man. Wasn't that like yesterday? Last week? Folks, we can help your brand, whether that's a personal brand or a business that you're affiliated with, own or otherwise. You can hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. We can let you know how we can benefit you throughout social media, and of course here on our Buckeye show or any of the shows that we provide. And also our Amazon links in the description section. And what the deal is there is if you use our Amazon link, it is completely transparent to you, acts exactly the same as you currently shop, doesn't differ in any way, doesn't cost you a penny, and helps grow what we do here. Tony, I'm going to start with you since you've got your eyes on Michigan about as well as anyone outside of the actual maize and blue arena there. This is being touted by many people to be like this perfect team, complete team, can do no wrong. Every position unit's buttoned up. And I'm not being condescending, slightly condescending in saying that because that's what it looks like. But at the same time, while Michigan, I will grant them this. I believe they're the only team in the country that has not struggled against anyone really at any portion of the game. Yeah, it was 14-6 against Bowling Green. Okay, I'll give them a half. But basically, have not struggled against anyone. However, their best win, whether that's Rutgers, Minnesota, or Nebraska, they're all kind of like middling around the 10th position in the Big Ten, is probably the worst win of any competitive team in the country.
Yeah, the schedule and having to watch this every single week, it's the same thing. And you talked about Notre Dame's yards per play at 17. So that's one of Ohio State's opponents. In terms of yards per play, I went back and looked at Michigan's opponents offensively. They faced the number 130, the number 66, the number 111, the number 93, 83, and the number 122 offenses in a nation. And of course, Michigan fans respond to me like, yeah, but you got to take Michigan's game out of there. And then how are those numbers? The numbers you don't jump from 122 to 46 because you remove one game against Michigan. These are bad offenses. And you look at I wrote in Michigan Monday, like the week before, I listed all of the quarterbacks and I listed the quarterbacks that Michigan has faced, and I listed the teams that Michigan has faced. And I'm like, I challenge anybody to match up these quarterbacks to these teams. You can't do it. These guys are no-name guys and guys you've never heard of. Even against Bowling Green, they didn't play their starter. They didn't get to face Connor Bazelak, who they played, against Indiana a year ago. They're facing second and third stringers from bad teams, and they're doing exactly what they should do. They're destroying these guys. But also, prior to this week, because I haven't done it this week, their pass efficiency defense is marginally better than what these teams are doing against every other defense. So like Michigan's defense isn't necessarily doing anything different than other teams' pass defenses have done against these quarterbacks. So I do think Michigan's defense is very good. They commit no penalties. They're solid. They're always in the right spot. They are a professional and disciplined unit, and they're very good. And I don't think Ohio State's going to be able to run the ball on them. But they have played absolute nobodies in terms of it. All due respect to all of the nobodies out there, they have not played anybody worth talking about. And you can go through the quarterback names, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, Heinrich Harburg, the two guys from Bowling Green I can't remember anymore, East Carolina. I challenge anybody to throw the name out there. It's been who's who of who.
Wimbush from Rutgers and on and on and on, or whatever.
He's probably been the best.
You're going the Notre Dame route from about 10 years ago, Steve.
Well, but the Wimsatt, Gavin Wimsatt from Rutgers,
yeah.
like he's
not Wimbush.
He's got potential, but he's not. I mean, and he also threw like a 70-yarder against him, so it's not been good.
Yeah, this seems to be a wrestling match I have with Michigan fans every day. You cannot control the conference schedule. So I am not in any way. And when it all comes to wash at the end of the season, Ohio State's game against Maryland, you're obviously going to make that one up. Ohio State's got a trip to Wisconsin that could have been similar to, in other seasons, Michigan's trip to Minnesota. But it doesn't appear as though that's the case because Minnesota's awful. So they can't control the conference schedule. But still, you cannot in any way back out of the argument that your administration, your athletic department, Ward Manuel failed to schedule. Well, he did schedule. He canceled a home and home with UCLA. So you played garbage the last two non-conference schedules. That's all there is to it.
Steve, what are you setting the over-under on UCLA, Michigan if they played this year? Those two defenses.
Man, that's a good one. Probably 34. I don't know. It wouldn't be real high. Michigan, and I'm just kind of looking this up because I got to do a segment later today about this Big Ten race. And the common thread is between Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State is they're all in the top 10 in total defense. And as we've said, a good bit of that is a function of the teams that they've played. I think Ohio State's defense has earned a lot of credit for what it's done against Western Kentucky, Notre Dame, and Maryland, teams that have done pretty well offensively in their other games other than when they played Ohio State. So to me, Ohio State does deserve some credit defensively. I'm just looking up now what everybody is rushing per game on offense, and I find that Penn State's just under 200 yards a game. Let's see here. Michigan is 185 per game. And I hate to click on Ohio State here and see what they are, because I think this is going to be the indicator that in the end might separate these teams. Ohio State's at 131, so a difference of 60 yards basically between Ohio State and its two main rivals. And those 60 yards are the world. I mean, they just mean so much. And again, matchups are a hard thing to quantify, like when you're, comparing apples and oranges with all these different teams and opponents that they play. It's not like the NFL where the Browns and the Bengals, probably have 8 or 9 common opponents by the time the season ends, and you can make some valid comparisons if you're trying to handicap a game between them. But to me, that's where the difference lies, is that Michigan and Penn State have shown that they can run the football, and Ohio State hasn't, although Ohio State's opponents probably, a game or two better across the board than what certainly Michigan, and I would put Penn State in the middle probably in terms of opponents.
Yeah, looking at the Penn State thing, like they have played the same number of games as Ohio State and run the ball 80 more times than Ohio State. Ohio State's averaging just a little bit better yard per carry, but Penn State, there is something to just 3 yards, 4 yards in a cloud of dust, just sticking to it. And that's something that Ohio State does not do with their running game, just stick to it. And I think it's something that they could lighten up the box and run the ball more on second down, perhaps after an incompletion or no gain on first down. But in terms of overall, like total, like yards per play in the Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan are both like neck and neck, and Penn State is a full yard and a half underneath them. But the defense that Penn State has, like you've got to get that your offense against that Penn State defense, and that's going to be the tough thing, I think, for both of those teams. Yeah.
In those big games, it's where do we get the ball? Last week against Maryland was winning the battle of field position because they were moving the ball between the 20s, though they weren't scoring. They were pinning Ohio State back. Another thing about Ohio State was just piss poor special teams play last week. I mean, just a botched punt snap. They then fair catch a punt when there's nobody around and they're holding a guy running down to cover a fair catch. So instead of him returning that punt, and let's say there's no holding penalty and they get the ball at the 40, they started on their own 13-yard line. That's a difference of 27 yards that you've got to pick up. And then on one punt, Ohio State lines up and didn't have 6 men on the line of scrimmage for a punt. Guys didn't know where they were supposed to line up. I know it's a technicality, that deal where they line up like a half yard behind, so they're already giving ground when the snap is done and they don't have, they can block the guys easier, whatever. But I mean, penalties on special teams? No. I mean, you're holding a guy on a fair caught punt. He's just going to catch the punt. Let him go. He's not going to run with it. They're not going to go down and tackle him. I mean,
well, and you could also talk about the one where they're the muffed punt where half the team is jogging down the field. If they're running down the field, they're going to recover. They'll have a better chance of recovering that muffed punt.
They scream. We go to practice and they scream and yell about these special teams like there's some big deal, and they're not. They're just not. And I don't know. I don't know what to say. It's an unenthused bunch is what I would put, but whatever. I have a buddy, he says, I refuse to care more than they do. And that's kind of where we're at on some of these things.
Yeah. Well, you're laying this out, Steve, like it's 2015, but at least those guys knew what it took to win a national championship and already had that in their hip pocket to say, you know what, we blew this season, but look what we did last year.
Yeah.
I got a stat for you that I just worked out in my head here in the last 30 seconds, Steve, to take with you for your segment there. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. So they went 24-0 against the rest of the Big Ten last year, 8-0, 8-0, 8-0. They won the first 8 this year. That's 32 straight. You got to go back to the Penn State, Michigan State. So Penn State messes this up, of course, in 2021 at the end of the season. 32 straight by those 3 against the rest of the Big Ten.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
Stat.
And since we are previewing the Purdue game, as you both know, Ohio State hasn't lost a Big Ten game outside of the Michigan game since Purdue in 2018.
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Add those up. What's that? That's 9-0. That's whatever the rest of 2018. They won like another 3 or 4. Then it's 9-0 in 2019.
COVID in 2020.
COVID, it's 5-0, 6-0, 6-0 if you count the championship game. Then it's another 8-0, 8-0, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah, it's about 35 games probably thereabouts, give or take. Yeah, I mean.
Yes. This league.
So what you're telling me is that Ohio State is due. That's what you're saying, Mark? That's your argument that you're going into this? That's what you're telling the Buckeye fans watching right now?
Sometimes throw at me that I'm like, what does this due business mean? You're due, they're due, whatever. Is Rutgers due? They should beat Ohio State, right? They should win that game this year. They're due. Maryland was due last week, right?
Rutgers got a win over Michigan in like 2014. They're not due for another, 6 or 7 years.
60 or 70.
Oh, come on. Rutgers is getting better. But it just shows the disparity in this league.
Yeah, they've separated themselves out. I mean, they're the only unbeatens left now that Maryland is out. I guess Wisconsin's still undefeated in the conference. But, Ohio State has Purdue this week and then Penn State at Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is starting to play some pretty good football. Obviously, their big showdown with Iowa kind of looms large for them. But, in terms of the West race. But to me, again, it's going to come down to these games for Ohio State. Next week, Penn State is just, the end all be all. You're playing at home. You got to win that game. And yet, Franklin, he just burns and burns and burns. He wants to beat Ohio State in the worst way possible if he could do it. I mean, think about all the close games that Penn State has given to Ohio State in the last decade. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling. So I don't know. We're about to hit the rubber hitting the road phase of the program here because, I mean, either you are good enough or you're not, and Ohio State's got to play much better. That's just the fact of the matter. Or they're going to lose one or both of these showdown games.
Yeah, we've seen better offenses go into Purdue and lose. So you can't take that lightly. In terms of Mark, talking about the Big Ten, when Urban Meyer came into the Big Ten, I remember writing and talking about how he is going to raise the rest of the Big Ten, or he's going to leave them completely behind. And he did a little bit of both. He raised the Big Ten, I believe. People had to invest in more coaches. The head coaches got better. They got better head coaches. And I think the UCLA, USC, Washington, Oregon expansion additions, that's going to do the same thing. It's going to raise the Big Ten, and it's going to leave some or leave them behind in terms of whoever doesn't want to compete. Because right now, with the way it's just Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, and everybody else is closer to bad than good. That's not that. I don't see that getting better without the expansion of the West teams. Like, you're in a position now where you only have to be one of the 12 best teams in the nation to play for a national championship. That is attainable for everybody in the Big Ten. And if you're not trying that, you don't think it is, then leave. And you're cashing checks, but you're not doing anything with them. You're just putting them in the bank, whatever. And you're not spending the money to compete for something that you could compete for. Anybody can be in the top 12, and you just have to try. And once you add 4 more teams who conceivably are going to try, that's going to make it harder for all of these guys. So they're going to have to either raise their games or just give up.
Yeah, most people that follow college football don't make the simple connection that you just made and have made for years, all of us here, that Indiana, we think of them as poor Indiana. I'm just going to pick on Indiana as one of a representative of about 5 or 6. That poor Indiana, they don't have anything. They don't have any resources. They don't have any this. They don't have any that. Well, they're already making more money than 90-some% of the schools in the country. And then that's going to be jacked up considerably next season. So they don't have to be poor Indiana.
No, and it'll be interesting. There's been some talk about maybe having coaches contribute to collectives at some point when it comes in house, and then you go pay Tom Allen $20 million and he puts half of his money into the NIL, or that's part of the deal where that's the first $20 million coach will actually be taking home about $6 million because most of their money will be going into the collective.
Did you see the comment that was it Mark Stoops said that Georgia bought some really good players and that's why they got smashed by Georgia, is that through NIL, and then they asked Kirby Smart about that, and he said, I really don't have any comment about that other than that's just Mark trying to get his fan base to donate more money to their collectives so that they can buy good players too. So it's openly discussed now, we've come to the point 2 years into this where it's now openly being discussed that NIL is no longer for name, image, and likeness. It's for inducements to come play at our program, pretty obviously. So, I don't see a lot of, NIL, commercials or whatever with these college athletes. It's like, we don't have time to make a commercial. Here's $50,000. Just come play for us. We don't care about you doing a commercial for us. So
It is interesting that Kentucky has always been beaten by Georgia because Georgia is buying players. Like, that's how the SEC has always existed. That's why Kentucky has always been bad.
It's business as usual.
Yeah. But now you can talk about it because it's semi-legal. And in the past they wouldn't because it was totally illegal. And so, you're still protecting the omerta. You're protecting the brotherhood of the coaching profession. And I see coaches complain about it, but until they start putting names to it, and at least Mark Stoops like put a name to it, but until they start doing that, like none of this is going to really change or get fixed. And you can't shame the shameless. And then when it all comes down to it, is like, oh, you're just, all you're doing is helping teenagers. And what's wrong with that? And so that you can always fall back on, we're just helping the kids. I didn't know that was a bad thing.
But unless I'm missing something, and I will apply this to the Lane Kiffin response to Jimbo and Nick Saban last summer, going back and forth, and then him throwing in his, well, basically we don't have those kind of resources, we can't compete, all that sort of thing. Well, I'm just going to throw numbers out. If you're Mark Stoops and you're looking at Georgia and they're pulling in and paying players $10 million per season, and you're at 4, I understand the jealousy and I understand the contempt. But then if you just beat up on Ball State 2 weeks ago and they're raising practically nothing, then you're just, what are you complaining about? You're complaining that you can't compete with the elite, but you're still beating up on 8 out of 12 teams on your schedule. So it works in the same way for everyone, just at different degrees.
And I think Mark Stoops is perfectly fine being at Kentucky, winning 8 games a year, but eventually fans get tired of it. So then he gets annoyed by it and has to speak out against it. Like, yeah. I can be 8-4 in the regular season and either finish 8-5 or 9-4, and I'll be happy because I'm at Kentucky making a good living without any notion that I'm supposed to win a national championship or even compete for one. But eventually, as Glenn Mason found out, as everybody at Nebraska found out, like Earl Bruce found out, eventually 8-9 wins, you get tired of that. And you want more because you're right there. And yet I saw the Mark Stoops, somebody called into his radio show and said, you've only beaten 2 SEC teams with winning records in conference play since you've been in the SEC. And he's like, well, that's not right, but it was, so it's a great time to be alive in the SEC East that's been down as long as he's basically been in it, and capitalizing on some wins there and shooting some fish in the barrel pretty well there.
It reminds me of Kirk Ferentz going back to the well this past week, just yesterday, about his offense that is 131 in the country out of 133 teams. Like, none of us could have predicted that. And him defending it as all that matters is we're 5-1, we win games, that's all that matters. Well, if you take that same thought process, that means the defense is not elite. The special teams aren't elite, because if everyone just is the sum of the whole, and that means your tight ends aren't elite, you're not tight end you, because everyone is just contributing to what's an 8-4 team basically every season. It's just insane. And one point to the scheduling, the new schedule that comes out here next season, we just had the next 5 years released. The way it really hits home, at least for me, was we did a live stream and I basically said, look at it, everyone. And we went from team to team and said, take a Western Division team. They typically are going forward playing about 3 Eastern Division teams. So that seems like it's the same as it's been in the past, where they play the 3 Eastern Division teams. They're currently playing the other 6 in the West. Okay, now they're only playing about 3 in the West. And so you cover up the other 3 that they're missing, and it's usually like Northwestern, Minnesota, and Illinois. And it's being replaced with Oregon, UCLA, and Washington. And it's like, that's the difference in your schedule starting next season. Wow. Oh, you're on mute, Steve.
My bad. I have my haves and have-nots in the Big Ten, and I think there's going to be about 9 haves and 9 have-nots. And usually Ohio State's been playing about 4 halves a year as it was going. And it looks to me like it's going to be up to about 5 a year. And one thing that is obvious there is they're sending Ohio State to the West Coast once a year, for each of the next 5 years, and for one game. And I don't think that, when it was just USC and UCLA, it certainly wasn't going to be like that. So, and I'm not 100% sure this is for the better. I did get to spend some time with Tony Petitti the last few days at the Big Ten Media Days, and he said, their number one priority was getting that football component next 5 years, which I thought 5 was kind of ambitious. I thought that they would do this in 2-year increments, but I guess they decided to just go full bore and do the next 5 years. And in their mind, it does set it up so everybody will play everybody, maybe home and away in a 5-year period. I don't know. But so every player in the league, if you stay 4 years, would get to see every other stadium, I guess, give or take 1 or 2 maybe. But it does look like there's an additional competitive game for Ohio State just on average every year. This year there's, 4. Next year there'll be 5, typically competitive games. And well, how does that equate it to the year? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see and find out. But I think the human toll of sending teams cross country, I hope they strategically place these bye weeks or open weeks, so that you can recover from that. And, I'm sure that they won't. I said to him, this is something to think about. Basketball, no one really cares. I understand. But if Ohio State goes out to play a weekend of like USC on Thursday night and UCLA on Saturday, the Thursday night game cannot be at 5 o'clock local time, 8 o'clock Eastern time, because nobody in Los Angeles could get to that game at 5 o'clock on a Thursday night. So you've now created a situation where you've sent a team out there to play 2 games, and the first one on a weeknight has got to be no earlier than 9:30 Eastern time, and that's not better. That's for the worse for the fans of the team in the Eastern time zone. And the same thing certainly applies with football, a Saturday night game at 10 o'clock Eastern time. I can only think it happened to Ohio State one time when none of the TV partners wanted Ohio State's game with Arizona, like ABC and ESPN said, nah, baby, nah, don't really want that. And Fox Sports West picked it up for their Pac-12 package, and it was at 10 p.m. Eastern time, 7 o'clock local time. The other thing was it was 95 degrees out there, so you really didn't want to play a game any earlier than 7 o'clock Eastern time. That's the only late night game I can ever remember Ohio State playing. That was in 2000 even, I believe. And Ohio State trailed at halftime, won the game, but nobody in Columbus saw it because, it ended at 1 a.m., So it's like, I don't know. This isn't for the better. Tony Petitti's response. Yeah, Tony's response was, well, our TV partners want an audience. And if we are sending one of our primary audience giving programs out there, then they're not going to stash that game at 11 o'clock Eastern time where nobody on the East Coast is going to watch it. He said that wouldn't be a good business move. So I guess what that means is Rutgers can prepare for a lot of 10 o'clock games and Ohio State probably won't.
Before you guys need to hit it, let's give Purdue a minute here because, the history is that let's not look past this one. 19.5 points sounds eerily similar to whatever it was in 2018, probably 18, 17, something in that range, close to 20 points. And this is not a horrible football team. We've talked about horrible teams in the Big Ten. This is not a good team, but they ripped off 24 consecutive points 2 weeks ago against Illinois. They came close to beating Iowa last week. They've got a nice little 1-2 punch with Devin Mockabee and Tyrone Tracy in the backfield, and Hudson Card, if healthy, and I know he's been a bit hampered from running the football, is a decent dual threat quarterback, and they've played a reasonable schedule.
Yeah, I mean, they have played some name brand teams, lost to Syracuse, lost to Fresno State. They beat somebody in there, and I know that Virginia Tech, and then who is their one? They beat Illinois pretty handily, and that was a surprise to me. I thought Illinois was going to be a little bit better team this year, but Illinois has completely gone in the crapper, losing at home to Nebraska. I mean, that's like a fireable offense. So Just think about what I just said is losing at home to Nebraska, not your grandfather's Nebraska, but 2023 Nebraska. So Purdue, they're just kind of there, and Ryan Walters' first year as a head coach, got to get some players in there. They won the division last year on a tiebreaker, basically, but I think it was a 3-way tie. I think they won the tiebreaker, or a 2-way tie. I don't know. But Ohio State's not really in a position to overlook anybody as bad as they played, last week against Maryland. I know it was a 20-point win, but didn't look or feel like a 20-point win. They got to get their stuff together, and this is as good a place and time to do it.
I was just looking at the last 3 times Ohio State lost at Purdue. So 2018, they were 12.5-point favorite. 2011, 7.5-point favorite. And 2009, they were 13.5-point favorite. Lost all of those games. The last time Purdue beat Ohio State in West Lafayette as a favorite themselves, they were +6 in 2004 against one of the worst Ohio State teams this century.
Yeah, that was
a
bad
the week
one.
before Michigan, right?
Yeah. 2009 was with Terrell Pryor. Ohio State, I think, was number 2 or 3 in the country, undefeated. And Purdue at the time was 1-5. Danny Hope was their coach, I believe.
Get used to it.
And it was the first time they had lost to a team that was 4 games under 500 overall at any point in the season, maybe back to the first Coop year, when they were 4-6-1. That may have been. So over 20 years, it was the first time they'd lost to a team. They don't lose to teams with losing records very often, but to lose to one that was 1-5, that was to be an undefeated team. Losing to a team that was 1-5, almost unheard of.
Yeah, those losses stand out, obviously, in West Lafayette for Buckeyes fans. Those are some of the most memorable games for me because they usually stung extremely bad. The 2011 game, not so much, because obviously Ohio State was headed toward a 6-6 season, but still Braxton Miller and the guys lost in overtime in that one. I think Urban Meyer did have one team that went to West Lafayette and won like 800-0, like some ridiculous 56-0 or.
Yeah, 56-49, something like that.
All right, guys. Appreciate you being here. One more time, Tony. Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly, of course.
Check me out at Buckeye Huddle. Just posted a story, interview with Jayvan Boggs, talking about his growing up as an Ohio State fan and getting an opportunity to be a Buckeye. And Buckeye Weekly is dropping just about every day now, and we talked about. I revisited the Maryland game, rewatched it, and discussed what we learned from watching the TV broadcast, which is always different than watching it from the field in the press box.
And folks, remember that many of you have just joined us in the last 10 or 15 minutes. Just stick around and you can watch the rest of the video once it posts, which is pretty much immediately. Steve, what's going on this week?
Oh, not much. Got to
for you.
Yep, got to tape some segments today with Spectrum and NBC4 for their shows here this coming weekend. This is going to be the first game Ohio State's played that I'm going to miss in 22 years because my niece, Kelsey, is getting married in Washington, D.C. So family comes first. So I'll be in Washington, D.C. for that and following along on Peacock. First non-televised game for Ohio State in 26 years. So a lot of history being made this weekend, I guess. So there you go. And Chris Holtman, they asked him about his team having 8 games. 8 of their 31 games this year are going to be on streaming, 5 on Peacock and 3 on BTN Plus, as well as the potential for one of their games down in Florida could be a streaming game too if they're in the consolation game of the tournament they're playing in, which they probably will be because they're playing Alabama the first day. And Alabama's, like, as we know, suddenly a national basketball powerhouse as well. And he's like, has he heard much about the streaming furor? And he says, no, but he looked at his watch and he goes, I think we will at about 11:45 on Saturday when, in my words, all the blue hairs are like, I thought this was on NBC. What's going on? Channel 4 is showing an infomercial. What's going on here? So no, Grandpa, it's not on 4, 6, or 10. It's not on BTN. It's not on Fox Sports 1. It's nowhere you can find it. I'm sorry.
Yes, there will be some sort
Tony,
of
is it
upgrade
true
to that.
Spectrum cable subscribers can get a year of Peacock for free? Is that what you unearthed?
Yeah, if you Google that, you should be able to find it. But Spectrum subscribers, and also if you're just Spectrum Internet, you might be able to get it for a year as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I subscribe for WWE. I'm a big wrestling fan, and I watch their live events that they have, WrestleMania and all that stuff on there. It's $6 a month. Plus, they have other streaming stuff that we watch. And the Notre Dame game is archived on there forever. You'll never see it. I asked somebody from Big Ten Network about that. The rights to the replay said we were inundated with requests to replay that game, the Ohio State Notre Dame game this year. And he said, we don't have the rights to it. He said with NBC now kind of under the tent a little bit as a Big Ten, whatever, maybe NBC could work something out with Notre Dame to allow it. But Notre Dame controls the rights to it. So why would they ever want a game that they lost replayed anywhere if they own the rights to it? The answer is you'll never see it. But it is on Peacock. So there you go.
Good stuff. Appreciate Tony. Appreciate Steve. Lock in on their work, folks. Thank you so much for being here. Make it on back, of course, next week. We will have the post game here at the Voice of College Football after the game, and bring a friend or 2 or 50 with you next week, and we will do it again.
See it.